Roma. Apologies for the crayon art, but here we see a role-playing game. And why do we run games at all? Well, the clue is in the game part, I suppose. There are different reasons why people enjoy role-playing games. I enjoy role-playing games because they're fun. I enjoy them as an exercise in creative storytelling. I especially enjoy them because I've always been one of those people who doesn't enjoy television very much or movies. I find them frustrating. Why are they doing that? Why are they doing that? Why don't they do something else? And I felt that ever since I was a small child. Is it ADHD? Is it some kind of weird control thing? I don't know. The reasons why people play games are many. I also like games which have rules and which have win and loss conditions. I know that's unfashionable, but I quite like there to be a plot for the players to engage with. And I like the weird things that happen to come as a result of the player's interaction with that and then running roughshod over the plot. But I usually start off with one in mind rather than, trying to spontaneously run an entire session. So for me, killing characters happens, and that made me very controversial at times. You killed a player character? Yes, because otherwise it becomes less fun if there aren't, you know. So why do we go to conventions? Well, if we enjoy running games at home, we could spend forever just sitting around with our friends playing games, and it would be great. And many of us would be really happy to do that. But also, there's a real delight in going to somewhere where everybody else is a bit like you. For me, my first conventions were a bit of an exercise in misery. Why? Because I was broke. Because I have throughout my life avoided work of any kind and have chosen instead to be a pampered plaything of beautiful women, I have in fact never had very much cash. In reality, I have always wanted to sleep most of the day and do as little as possible apart from play games. Sadly, this does not work, I have discovered, and people expected me from a very young age to get a job. One of those people was my headmaster, who on my first day at school, when I was 5 years old, when I went to school for the first time in England, not Denmark, said to me, "Christian, when you grow up, what do you want to be?" And I said, "I would like to be Father Christmas." "Why would you want to be Father Christmas?" he said. "So you could bring joy to people and travel around the world, bringing joy to children all over the world." "No," I said. "I want to be Father Christmas because I've seen my daddy work and come home tired, and he only works one day a year." So at the age of 5, I demonstrated what it was that was my life's work, and that has been my life's work, to avoid work of any kind. Because of that, I've ended up as a university lecturer, chairing a psychical research group, teaching philosophy of science, history, and many other things. Oh dear, let's go back. And many other dubious pastimes. Doesn't prepare me very well for actually being a sensible person to talk about anything, but it is sadly true. So I didn't have any money. And the first conventions I went to, many of them were actually largely trade fairs. So what's the difference between a tabletop games convention and a trade fair? A trade fair exists for the purpose of the industry, to promote the products. There may be gaming events there, but they are usually secondary. And a classic example that everyone would probably say would be, well, Games Expo? Not quite. Games Expo has always had a trade fair, and the trade fair became more and more important. And when I first went there, I had made the terrible mistake of not signing up in advance to play role-playing games. I ran out of money in the first 30 minutes. Well, ran out of money I could spend on role-playing game stuff. I kept enough money to buy lunch. I bought loads of books, spent the rest of the day becoming increasingly miserable, waiting for my friends to come home while I carried the books around with me and just talked to people. So those kind of events, trade fairs, are geared up. You go to them, you buy games, you play games at demos, you discover new products, and they exist to promote the industry and for the industry to network and so forth. But that's not the whole story of Games Expo. For many, many years, John Dodd was determined that would not be the case. And he ran a fantastic role-playing game section that for the last few years has been over. Since they moved to the NEC, it's been over at the Hilton. And you can go there. So it's not a clear definition. There was a gaming exhibition a few years ago at Alexandra Palace that I worked. Was it a trade fair? No, because the people who went to it were mainly not industry, but the actual exhibitors were, and there was a lot more exhibiting and selling than there was playing. So tonight I'll be emphasising the kind of conventions you go to which are about the playing. That does include, in my opinion, Games Expo, but it's only half of the story there. It's a bit more complicated, that one. Let's go forwards. Since 2020, we've seen a lot of change in the industry, and most of that has been, one imagines, occasioned by, well, partly occasioned by COVID. One of the big changes for me was the move to running games online, and I've used Foundry Virtual Tabletop, and I've used Fantasy Games Unlimited, and I've played games. My first games online were run years ago when some of my friends went off to other parts of the world, and we played on Skype, which proved to be incredibly difficult. And then we played on Google Meets and Google Hangouts. And, you know, over the years, this has slowly become more and more of a situation for many of us. A lot of us cannot get enough people together who want to play that particular game. If you look here, Lost Catacombs of the Ezralian Kings, RuneQuest Garantha. Finding enough people for that? I can do it easily online. Pendragon, a great game. Not always possible to find people who want to play it. Usually Cthulhu and D&D, not a problem. But, oh, what have I done? Sorry about that if I just caused a horrible blur to appear. So we are seeing a shift over towards electronic gaming. Now, we're talking online. That's why we're here. And we're all going to be talking and communicating, and everybody else is going to have their chance to say what they... But one of the reasons I think conventions are increasingly important for me is much of my role-playing life is moving online. I'm deliberately moved at the moment. We've got a Ars Magica game happening in my basement on a Sunday. And, you know, there's a Traveller game, and I've got players coming over in a while tonight to play Traveller. But we play these games, but we don't necessarily normally get to meet up. Another thing is the challenge of computers. Now, the problem with computers is they are better than me. I am not good at art. And if anyone's seen my post in the RuneQuest thing when I feature my own art, it is primitive, it is crude, and it is diagrammatic, and it involves stickmen. Last night, I asked a program, I spent 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes preparing a program that by feeding it the information I wanted, and it made me a series of pictures that I showed to my players. Are computer games going to replace tabletop role-playing games entirely? Are we going to see a move of the industry away? Is AI art, and I use the word AI very loosely because it's not very intelligent, is it? It hasn't actually reached general intelligence yet. But let's be polite to it just in case it is. And I, for one, welcome our robot overlords. But, you know, is this so-called AI art, which can produce works of absolutely stunning beauty, is it inevitable? I don't know. Since 1982 or 3, I have seen people predicting the end of the tabletop role-playing industry. That was why, you know, Jackson and Livingstone went off to IDOS. They saw the money and the wave of the future was going to be in computers. The computer games industry, in certainly the AAA games, involve hundreds of programmers working for years to produce works of outstanding art with budgets higher than Hollywood movies. My convention games are written in a night, 2 hours, to play with a group of friends around a table with other human beings. They are not comparable. They are not meant to be comparable. They are different things. Since 1982, people have told me computer games will mean all of this role-playing rubbish will go away. I don't think it'll ever happen. Whether or not you approve of AI art, and it certainly has its uses in things like this, as I say, it is absolutely not something that you need to run a good game. Another thing that we've seen in very recent times is the move to pay to play. And whereas in the past, local role-playing game shops around here, and I'm lucky enough to have 3, 3 role-playing games, specialist gaming shops, and there was a gaming cafe till Christmas last year. There are 3 gaming shops within a 10-minute walk of my house. There are 5 retailers that sell role-playing game products within a 10-minute walk of my house. 3 of those are specialist businesses. That's incredible. It certainly didn't happen in the 80s and 90s. I live in Cheltenham. Cheltenham is not a big town. It's 100,000, but it had a games cafe. It's got Income Gaming, which is a specialist wargaming club. During the night, a couple of nights a week, it's a nightclub. During the day, they put gaming tables in the nightclub. The bar is opened. You go in, and the nightclub is a wargaming club. How brilliant is that? The pub where I used to DJ and where I danced and where I snogged many of my old girlfriends and first met them is now a wargaming club and a role-playing games club. I just find it incredible. There is a massive upswing, and that has led to a change in culture. Proud Lion, our local game shop, now charges a tenner for you to go and learn how to play D&D there. You can run, my partner Becky is support at Pelgrane Press. They do the wonderful Eternal Lies, one of the best Cthulhu campaigns. In fact, probably the best Cthulhu campaign I've ever run. It's the only one that can be compared with Master Nyarlathotep. If you look here, somebody's running it, gay friendly, Trail of Cthulhu, Eternal Lies, fantastic. $25 a session. $25. That's a lot of money. There are people running Vampire. There are people running things. I could make money running games online. And that is the way that the future, no doubt, will go. So why should we go to conventions? Well, hang on. I told you my art was great. Here we see what happens when we do not use AI. Here we see Chris and Carol. Does anyone recognize them? Here we see contingency. And if you look closely, you will notice that everybody has beards. Even the lady at the top has got a beard. And the reason for that is it's a running joke with us. Everybody at role-playing games wears black T-shirts and has a beard. I certainly do. Certainly have the black T-shirt. Sadly, although I'm Danish and my father was called Gunnar Jan Jensen Roma, I mean, Gunnar, that's a good Danish name, I cannot grow a beard. All I get is this weird bum fluff. I have tried all week to grow a beard in honor of this thing. It hasn't worked. And now I look at Goober, I look at Mike, I look at everyone else out there, and I feel thoroughly ashamed of myself. Oh no, Richard's there. Hey there. At least I'm not the only beardless one. So contingency. Why did I start with contingency? Because contingency is the beating heart of the British role-playing game industry now. Forget your Dragon Meets, forget your all of those other, conventions. There are loads, and many of them are fantastic. And I have hosted one myself for 18 years, Grand Tribunal. It's an Ars Magica convention. I'll come back to that in a minute. But contingency, which came out of the old conception that was run down in the 2010s, up till the 2010s, down in South Coast at Nash. Contingency came about through the sheer enthusiasm of Carol and others. It's a work of love, and we all know certain people who turn up year after year. I can see Richard's here, and they work so hard. The bring and buy sale is put together. The referees work hard. Carol and Chris work hard. The money goes to charity. It's a marvel. It is a work of love. So the first reason why we go to role-playing games conventions is love. What but love could make you want to go to Hunstanton in January? When I was a young child, lived briefly in a caravan at Hunstanton. And while I was there, all I can remember was RAF jets screaming overhead, rain and snow, and a desperate desire to get back to Bury St Edmunds in Suffolk. Hunstanton was the bleakest place I ever lived. But actually, Sunny Honey in the summer is beautiful. And Sunny Honey in January is actually a bit of a fairyland for me. When I go there now, I really love it. Year after year, I see the same volunteers, the same people, and I play games with some of the nicest, kindest, most friendly people you'll ever meet. There's a bar, there's food. The staff at Searles are fantastic. So why do I go and run games at conventions? Because I love games and because I love gamers. That's the first reason. Now, you will notice that as we go through this talk, I am going to show various pictures. What I would like you to do is, if there's a chat thing, try and put into it, or if you can just shout if you work it out, which role-playing game is which. If you're going to go to run a role-playing game at a convention, if you're going to go, the first thing to do, of course, is to go to a convention and play some games. And no one expects you to have to run if you don't want to. I think the world has two types of people: people who enjoy running games and people who enjoy playing games. But I like both. Yes, I am by game, or however you say it. I like both running and playing games, and I really enjoy. I resent sometimes the fact that when I go to a convention, I end up running 7 slots. And because I'm running 7 different games and I'm fighting with 7 different printers as each one blows up in the week before, and I'm trying to get the characters right and just trying to get everything ready, I usually find that by the time I get to the convention, I need a holiday. And in fact, by the time I get back from the convention, I need another one. Don't feel that you have to actually, when you go to a convention, that you have to actually run games. You don't have to run games. You can go and just play. And for your first convention, maybe that might be a good idea. The second reason why we should all go to conventions and run games, though, is if we didn't, what would we do? Can you imagine what it would be like if we did not actually run games? If everyone turned up and thought, oh, I might play a game this year, but then nobody volunteered to run, it would be like Tinder, only none of us would fancy each other. We'd just sit there staring blankly. No one would know what to say. No, I'm joking. We get on pretty well as people. We'd talk, we'd drink beer, we'd sing songs. But there is no role-playing game convention without your participation, without your volunteering. And the people who sit on the desk at contingency, the people who work the bring and buy sale, the people who put the tables out, the people who work with searls, the people who do the setup, the people who do the tags, the people who organize the accommodation. Without that as well, because there's no convention, we owe them greatly. But you also need referees. We're the next stage down after the con organizers. We are the people who go along. So why should you go and run a game at a convention? Because you love games, because you love gamers, because you want to be part of a community, and because you want to meet other people. Can anyone guess what game this is meant to be, by the way? With a backwards hobbit? That was a D&D game. Let's go for the next one. That was my attempt at a D&D game. That's not a very clear one. That is actually meant to be Traveller, but it's clearly wrong. But that's why there's only D6s on the table. Because I should have done a Varga. People might have actually known what it was. Traveller. As it is, it could be anything from Star Trek, couldn't it? But there we go. This is the second one. There are also games you love. I love playing Traveller, RuneQuest, Chivalry and Sorcery. I have played that. I've played so many. In fact, every one of these is a different game I played. Let's go to the next one and see what it is. Call of Cthulhu, a perfect convention game in many ways. It's short. It has a clear plot line. Usually, your characters are investigating. There is something going down. They try and work out what's going on. Scheduling is easy for a 4-hour slot. Well, if they don't manage to solve the mystery within 4 hours, then they get eaten by the Gribbly, or they've probably all gone mad anyway. But I think we could all tell that was Call of Cthulhu, can't we? Let's go to the next one. World of Darkness games. I think everyone can tell that's meant to be Werewolf. They're not as popular now. They dominated the 90s, but they again make for really good con games. And if you say you're running Werewolf at a convention, there will be people who will play it. And I think we tend to forget that there are always going to be people who want to play. Anyone see that? Look at the picture of me in the top right corner. Can anyone see what I'm holding up?
But a Mega Traveller.
Yes, that is Mega Traveller. And if I offer to run Mega Traveller at a convention, there are people who want to play it. Heretically, anyone know what that is?
GURPS Traveller?
Nearly. Traveller T20, the D&D spin-off, which had Traveller. I've also got GURPS Traveller. I've got so many different editions of Traveller that you would have thought that nobody, you would find it hard to find people who want to play them. One thing I will say is that sometimes you go to a convention, people don't sign up for your game, and it's always heartbreaking. That's because sometimes, very, very rarely, I must say, there are more people playing games than, there are more games available than people who want to play. I don't think that happens very often, but conversely, I have never known a gaming convention like Conduct, Contingency, Condensed, Continuum, Consequences, Grand Tribunal, any of those which are about gaming rather than about, large trade stands, which has not had enough games for people to play. I don't think I've been to many conventions where there haven't been games, unless they have been very large, like Games Expo. Obscure games like Deadlands, people love playing games that they enjoyed when they were younger. People who go to a convention are not committing to play an entire, 6-month-long campaign or 3-year-long campaign. I have even played Chivalry and Sorcery at a convention. Not many people can say that, I don't think, but Chivalry and Sorcery, a game that has been around possibly almost as long as me. I think it was written in 1981, actually. It is one of those things that will, if you run it at a convention, there will be a hardcore of people who will come just to play that game. Pendragon, running that at the moment. GURPS. GURPS used to be run a lot of conventions. It hasn't been run recently. And the nice thing about it is if you're making pre-generated characters, you can always come up with a setting for your game. I know you can't get in, Ed. Excuse me a moment. Hi, Ed. I'm just presenting. Can you not get in? I've just tried to let you in again, okay? It says joining. Bye. There you go. I got a phone call from someone to tell me they can't get in. GURPS is a game where you can always write a one-off, and I was quite intrigued when I discovered the existence of GURPS furries. I knew there was a GURPS book for everything. I did not know there was a GURPS furries for 4th edition. I am not a furry. That's not my scene. But if I was, there is a GURPS book for it. It doesn't matter what you do in this life, there is probably a GURPS book for it written by Phil Masters. And I think that is why when I ran it, I didn't know if anyone would sign up. But actually, we got GURPS to work, sort of. And let's go forwards. Mutant City Blues, that's a Pelgrane Press game. I love their games. I play a lot of them. It helps the fact that my wife is their support person and works with Cat. RuneQuest. RuneQuest is a game that people keep telling me won't work at conventions. I find it works absolutely fine. I run huge amounts of it every year at conventions because I love the game. I love the background. And one of the things about it is it's got the most insanely detailed background of any RPG, in my opinion. I think there's more written for it than there is for D&D. But what I am very keen on stressing is that you only need to include the bits that are relevant to the game. You do not need people to know about the Jurastelli Godlearners and their influence in 1300s Craig Lorella, unless that's your thing, baby, and it's not mine. So you run a game that is focused on a particular thing. Right, I'm about to come to an end of my ranting, rambling, and actually get back to some real stuff. Let me just look at my notes because I have got some. This may surprise you. So the things that are on my list of what we should do, reasons to go, community connection, I've mentioned, expanding your storytelling skills. Absolutely, absolutely. I used to have a reputation at uni as being a good storyteller, and I've got a story about that. It was Christmas. My then girlfriend, Polly, had been driven mad by one of the most enthusiastic young ladies called Vicky. Our group looked like the kind of people you would recruit if instead of looking for role-playing games through White Dwarf, you went to Cosmopolitan. It was all young women aged about 18 to 21, 22. And they really loved the role-playing game Pendragon. We had a great group in that respect who would turn up and they would play. And we played once a week. But then they said they wanted to play a second time a week and then a third time a week. And then some of them basically moved into my house. At this time, we thought things were getting a bit weird. Nonetheless, it was all going pretty well. Everyone was good friends. We went to the Christmas ball, and one of my friends, I'll call her Vicky because that's her name, and she's still a role player today. She won't mind me sharing this story. Kissed a lot of people, as you do when you're at a Christmas ball. We were all huggy and friendly. And then she went back up to Birmingham. And this is where the story turns tragic. 10 days later, I get a phone call from her mother saying, Vicky has been taken to hospital. She has contracted meningitis. Everybody who was in contact with her at the ball needs to have injections or antibiotics. And we went, oh, okay. So I phoned up the doctors, and the duty doctor, astonishingly, had gone down with something like meningitis. So they patched through to the reserve duty doctor, who was on his honeymoon. He got married the day before. He had to leave his honeymoon bed and phone round to actually find someone. Eventually they came out and they started a mass vaccination and antibiotics campaign, whatever they do. And they checked me out. I didn't have any symptoms. Polly didn't have any symptoms. And over the next few days, we heard from Vicky's mum, who kept saying that all she talked about was your game. And we're sure she'll be all right, but she's in a coma. And then they told us she's not going to make it. And that had never occurred to me. I assumed she'd be sick, but I assumed she'd get better. And that night, about 8 o'clock, her mum phoned up. At the hospital, we've been to say goodbye. And her mum and dad had gone to say goodbye because it wasn't expected she'd make it through the night. She'd been on ventilation, etc., etc. And it was 8:25 when I took that call. And I sat down and I thought, can we carry on the game without one of the players, the most enthusiastic of the players? And I thought, this was really hard. It's a funny thing that in some of my campaigns, I've lost more players to death than I've lost characters in the game. More players have actually died now over the years than them. But this was when I was young. I was only about 22, 23. She was 20, and it was hard. And you might be wondering, what's this got to do with anything? Well, I'll bring it back to the plot in a moment. That was 8:23, 8:25, something like that. I remember looking at the clock. And I sat there, and me and Polly sat there, and we put the books away, and we put the stuff away. And about 10:30, the phone rang, and I thought, that's going to be it. Hi, Chris, it's Vicky. Now, I've got a friend called Kel Cooper, who'd written a book called Phone Calls from the Dead. And he looked at cases in the literature. There's a hell of a lot of them where people claim that they've received phone calls from people who've deceased. And for a moment, I nearly dropped the phone because the girl who'd just died was calling me. And I said, Vicky, yeah, I'm just phoning up. My character, yeah. Well, the wedding is due to come up because they're getting married. And I'm thinking that I'm working out what we should both wear for it. And you're not running Pendragon without me, are you? So thinking that I'm communicating with the dead, I say, no, I would never run Pendragon without you. Of course not. And she said, oh, good, good. And then I heard a noise like a beeping in the background. And I said, where are you? And she said, I'm at a payphone I'm in a hospital. What? I'm in a hospital. Well, why are you in a hospital? Well, I woke up and I was in bed. I've been sick, you see, and I was in the hospital and I can't remember much. And I woke up and there were these like tubes connected to me. I was connected to some kind of machine, but it's all right. I've unplugged myself. She had come round, unplugged herself in intensive care, walked through the hospital wearing only a dressing gown, found a payphone and reverse phone. Oh, I forgot to say it was a reverse charges phone call. And made a reverse charges phone call to my house in Cheltenham to tell me not to run Pendragon without her. Have you told your mother? No. Vicky, you need to. Now, Polly in those days, it was the early 90s, Polly actually had a very expensive work mobile phone. She got hold of the hospital, managed to get the ward, and managed to let them know that Vicky was at a payphone somewhere. And while I kept talking to her, Polly was doing all this, And they came and they collected her and they took her back. And she, of course, had come round. When they disconnected her life support, she had woken up. And the first thing she had done was called us. She had not called her mum and dad. She had called me to check that the Pendragon campaign was going on. That's dedication. That's the level we want from our role players. We want them to unplug themselves from life support and not call their parents or their loved ones, but call their referee. Because that's the level you want to inspire in your players. Now, I'm joking. It's complete lunacy, but it is all. I always remember it as an example of how much role-playing games can matter to people. And that night, I had to actually phone her mum and dad and break the terrible news that their daughter had actually recovered and was absolutely fine, and that they needed to get down to the hospital. And I said, I'm really sorry, but I've got to tell you that she's not dead. She's fine. I've just spoken to her. And they thought I was taking the mickey. They thought they hung up on me the first time, I think, but they eventually got the idea, called the hospital and went down and saw her. She recovered. She's still alive today. Her kids are role-playing themselves. One of them is at the university here and is a great guy. I'm not going to give her surname, obviously, but that is a story about how much role-playing games can mean to people. And that's why we are a community and we care about one another, and we should go and we should run those games that people care about, and we should develop our skills. You give back to the community, and another reason to go is how many games are there that you would never have played if you hadn't gone to a role-playing games convention? How many people here can honestly say that they would ever have played Fatal if they hadn't gone to a role-playing game convention? That was a joke, by the way. I've never played Fatal. I've only ever read the review. If you've never read the review, it's long and complex, but the whole game is. If you ever want to be banned from the UK convention scheme, look up that role-playing game. No, but there are role-playing games that I would never have discovered, I would never have bought. And there's an awful lot of small press games done by brilliant British designers that I would never have bought and never have learned about. Liminal is a great example. Cthulhu Dark, but there's so many other games that I've come to love over the years. You meet industry professionals. When I was 15 years old, no, 13 years old, I was at a games workshop event. What was it called? Games Day in London. And I was listening to Greg Stafford, who was talking about RuneQuest. And it was the worst role-playing game seminar I ever went to because I did not understand a single word of it. There was stuff about yellow elves and brown elves and green elves. And at that age, my experience was Balasta's Barracks, Cults of Prax, and I didn't know all this deep lore, and I kind of got lost very quickly. But one thing I will say is that a young Greg Stafford with his curly, short-cropped, knightly hair back then, it was after he had his long hair, it was cut short and curly. He was the most charismatic guy I ever met. I sat and I watched him, and it came to the break, and he was meant to go and have steak and chips. They'd got him steak and chips. And he was pretty upset because it turned out he was a vegetarian. And him and Games Workshop, I think, I can't remember what the arrangement was, but the guest did not feel happy. But he came and he sat down next to me and asked me what I thought of his seminar. And I said, I didn't understand a word of it. I hope that's not true of this one anyway. I didn't know a word you were talking about. And he said, what are you eating? And I said, oh, these are tuna sandwiches. I'm sorry, I was going to offer you some, but I've got some cheese and tomato. And I offered him a cheese and tomato, and he said, meat is murder, but fish is justifiable homicide. I'm hungry. So he ate one of my mother's tuna sandwiches. And for the next hour, that guy in his 20s or 30s, Greg Stafford, guest of honor, sat with a very young, very naive boy. And he talked to me about games, and he told me stuff about how he imagined the world. He told me that he was working on a new game. He called it Hero Quest. He wasn't going to use Steve Perrin's RuneQuest mechanics. He was going to use something called key points or chi points, and it was going to revolve around a D20, but it wasn't going to be like Dungeons and Dragons. And I eventually got to see that game a decade later, 15 years later. But that day was it was a great experience. And I think we all have stories. I've role-played with Marcus L. Rowland, a character from role-playing game history who will go down. I've role-played with many of the greats. I've seen Luke Arnson. I don't think I've role-played with him, but I ran a game in which a Delta Green game in which the players were in the 1970s were called in by Delta Green to rescue the children, college-age child who'd gone missing of one of the agents. And it turned out that he'd gone missing playing some weird game for geniuses involving dressing up as wizards and fighters and playing in the steam tunnels under his university. And it ended up with them taking down the evil cultist behind this manipulative, mind-bending, mind-warping game, who was one Gary Gygax. So they had to go to Gen Con and take down Gygax as part of their mission. But yeah, you know, I've played with a lot of luminaries, and that's a reason for doing it. Another reason for going is you're never otherwise going to get to meet the people who, as a child or as a young gamer, you admired. You'll get to play games that you'll never get to see anywhere else, and you'll get to take risks. I mean, yes, you should use safety tools. There's a thing called the X card. If you don't know what it is, just Google it. But you can run games that would absolutely make your parents' hair fall out if you need to. Just be sensible. I have seen it go horribly wrong. I have seen someone run a game that caused offense and it caused a meltdown for the actual event. But it happens almost never, and it's quickly forgotten. What kind of games? Pre-generated characters, easy to understand mechanics. Well, that helps, but if you're passionate enough and you love the game, clear objective. Think of something that the characters should know what they're trying to achieve, and if they choose to do something else, that's fine. Engaging hook. I ran a game in which all of the characters were students going to university in 1987. That is not an engaging hook, but they were in a shared house that very quickly turned out to be deeply creepy and weird. What did they do? Did they investigate the haunted shared house, the haunted terrace house by the canal? No, they engaged in the most outrageous series of drunken shenanigans and romances. One of them found himself a girlfriend. The others chatted up various other people. They role-played being students in the 1980s. They found that far more fun. When I ran my Regency Cthulhu, did they worry about rescuing their missing friend who'd gone missing on instead of being a bridesmaid on the day of the society wedding? No, they worried about stripping naked, covering each other in butter and pushing one another up the chimney to retrieve the chimney sweep boy who was stuck up a chimney. Players rarely choose to follow a plot. You go with what they do. You take their input as being really important. There's got to be enough choice, and diversity matters. Role-playing games conventions attract a diverse crowd. Make character sheets that have got a couple of different pictures, a male and a female, possibly a few with different ethnicities. You know, it's not hard to do in modern games or in many games. Give people choices, even if it comes down to what picture is going to be staring at them on their character sheet. Printing off 3 copies of the same character sheet is not really a huge loss. It can help to have visual aids and props. I don't think they're important. I like telling stories. I like having adventures, and I really enjoy times around the table. I have met some of the most wonderful players, and ensure that the players get what they signed up for. The thing I would always say is do not bait and switch. What do I mean by that? If you offer a D&D dungeon crawl, anyone know what game this is? It's Väsen. Väsen is Swedish for entity, and basically it's a game about folkloric entities, Swedish folk horror. I tend to run it set in Denmark. I think some of you, have any of you played one of my Väsen games? Yeah, what did you think, Richard?
Oh, brilliant. I think it's one of the best systems I've played, to be fair.
It's a lovely system. I mean, when I ran it, you went so far off piste that I basically, yeah, we didn't get to spend a lot of time on the system, did we? But yeah, I tried to get the kind of spirit of Christmas, and yeah, it was a fun game. I really enjoyed it. What do you think of the sketch? Does it pick up that kind of Swedishness for you?
No, to be fair, I was completely lost. No, I didn't get it. I should have got it, but I didn't.
Oh yeah, no, this is just like, these are Swedish entities from Swedish folklore. Next, yeah, and have a ending. Have something which marks the end, and that's the important bit. But the ending is never designed by CJ. The ending arises from what the players do, and that's really hard. Not so hard if you're playing with Richard, who decides to run out of town with the girl or whatever before the end, and invariably ties it up. but the players will be aware of the fact the hardest ones are slots immediately before meals, when people are keen to get down and have their dinner, or it's getting really late and some players have drunk 25 beers. But, you know, at the end of the day, I don't think I have experienced a problem player, not a serious problem player in all my years. And I have played with two children who were non-verbal autistics, or one was non-verbal, one was nearly non-verbal. And that made it much harder, but they played with their parents and a brother and they had a great time. They were laughing and smiling. And I was surprised because I thought, if you're non-verbal, you know, I wasn't expecting that level of emotional response, but something emotionally responded. Maybe it was the hugs and support and love. Maybe it was seeing their mum and dad do something they enjoyed. So that was at Games Expo. So, you know, we can, over the years, I've played with all kinds of different people with different choices, but don't bait and switch. And by that, I mean, if you offer them Call of Cthulhu, don't run a game about running a restaurant. Or if you do, and they never find the plot, and there was a plot there, they might feel cheated and they'll complain afterwards. Well, yeah, okay, it was great, but it wasn't Cthulhu. Or we enjoyed it, but it wasn't Cthulhu. It's because the way the players went was making Michael Winner dinner. They had to make Spotted Dick for Michael Winner, and they chose to ignore the creepy goings on and instead concentrate on finding out what Michael Dinner's primary school recipe for Spotted Dick was. That is when you accommodate the players, but that takes you in a direction that you never expected, and that can happen in a convention game. Right, I'm going to shut up because it's getting late and I've talked enough. Ars Magica. I, for the last 18 years, have run a role-playing game convention called Grand Tribunal. Everyone's welcome. It's not just Ars Magica. Ars Magica is a game that is designed for long-time play. It is a game where character generation never ends. It's one of the most fantastic role-playing games because it gives players a whole new way to interact with the system, because they can design spells on the fly. And because they are designing spells and following a set of rules which are designed to allow you to precisely measure what a given magical effect is, they have to work out whether or not their character can cast it. They have to work around various problems. So it can be an exercise in problem solving and in developing new ideas. And how do you get over the wall? Do you turn intangible and walk through it? Do you turn the wall into sand and wait for it to collapse? Do you use a spell to make a hole under the wall? Do you try and levitate yourself over the wall? Do you summon a giant eagle and use the eagle to carry you over the wall? There are so many solutions that players are constantly encouraged to be creative. It's a great game. It's not designed for conventions. But I have run a game set in a wizard's tower at Christmas that was a whodunit that featured 11 players at the beginning and 2 more joined 10 minutes in. So I think we had 13 players total, but certainly 11 for most of the game, who were sitting around a table in character with immensely complicated character sheets. All of them were wizards, and they were carrying out a whodunit. And if people tell you that you can't do a whodunit in Ars Magica, they are lying. You absolutely can. And you absolutely can have people casting improvised spells, discussing amongst themselves, exploring the tower, and eventually they found out the secret, which I will now spoil by revealing that it turned out that the person who done it was in the room the whole time. It was the table. The table was, in fact, embodied an elemental spirit, and the table was the murderer. So there you go. And they did work it out eventually. So you can run any role-playing game. You just have to measure how you're going to do it and think of a method and make sure that everybody stays engaged. Come along, run games. We need you. We love you. And if you don't, the men in black will come. Yes, I am a psychical researcher. And yes, I will talk to my friends, the renegade Pleiadians and the people from Sirius B, and they will come. Conspiracy X, haven't played it in years, but it was a great game in the 90s. Let's move on. And so, on that note, I'm going to shut up. I have talked for a bloody long time. I am going to go and run a game shortly. I'm going to start, as I promised, with Douglas. Douglas, what was your list of 10 things? And now we'll go to general chat. What should we do? What advice have you got? Let's start with Douglas's. Over to you, Douglas.
Okay, so probably the first one that I had you didn't already cover, because you covered a hell of a lot of good points, is the best way to get people to actually play the games you like is by getting them exposed to them. So
Yep.
if you want to know that more people are playing Call of Cthulhu, roping them in for a random one means that the next year you come along for the convention, you're most likely to hopefully get someone else involved enough to come and let you take a seat at the game the next year. And to be honest, some of the best stories are from sitting behind the GM screen, whether or not it's how your game went completely off piste or and to be honest, you're going to be more memorable to other people and make more friends by running a game, because the person next to you isn't the person that when you're playing isn't really the person you're paying only attention to. It's the person behind the screen or the other side of the table. And most of the kind of memorable people and the people who are willing enough to put in all the time are on that other side of the screen. You might as well take a turn on that side and actually get to know some people. And the biggest and main selling point is ice cream. So Contingency has the GM token. GM tokens can be exchanged for ice cream. GM for ice cream is the best selling point we've got.
Absolutely. In fact, there are some conventions who provide you with Games Expo. Used to provide me with accommodation at the Hilton because I ran enough games.
So many.
Yeah, you have to run so many games to do it, but most of the time we do it for the love of it. We do it because we want to do it. We do it because we're people who care about games, and there are companies who will pay you. In fact, one of the things I've noticed recently is that some of the big American companies are paying 10 to 12 people to go to conventions and just run exactly the same scenario. So you'll have 12 people running a Alien RPG adventure at a convention, and that is a new thing again. Things are changing, but for not so much for the small contingency style, the fan conventions, the ones which are run by the fans for the fans. Would you say that's a fair summary, Douglas, of that? Or
Oh yeah.
Okay. Do you have any more you want to add there?
I think those were the main ones. Unless you've got like an excuse that you want to buy more dice, that's always nice to get another set. Your GM dice can't be the same ones that you use as a player, so
do you know what?
Look at that extra set.
I don't think I have remembered to take dice to a convention ever in my life. I have turned up.
You need your GM ones, yeah.
I've printed out the character sheets. I'll have absolutely everything else, and I'll have to go and borrow a D20 of someone before the game. Usually Richard, actually. But yeah, whenever I actually try and go and run an event, the one thing that I forget to take is dice, and I sometimes over prepare. Okay, Richard, you're next. Go on. What do you reckon? Why should we go to conventions?
So I think for me, because I'm fairly new to this, as most of you know, it's a good way to, as you say, learn new games and learn new systems and get an understanding of something because obviously my military background, I spent a lot of time with all the same people for 20 years for most of them. I never really got to know different people and the way different people are. And for me, there was two reasons I started going to conventions. One was for the gaming, but two was to meet people who weren't like me. And I mean that in all senses of the word. So, to basically reintegrate myself back into society. I know that sounds mad, but that was one of the main reasons I started coming. But for me now, the three things for me is one is actually for me, it's a little bit of goodness for the soul with the helping out. And I was really quite touched when Carol and Chris asked me to start, being part of the team and helping out. I get something from that. It's like my way of giving something back. So I really enjoy that. Secondly, is getting to see the same faces. I know I said about seeing different people, but year on year, not seeing someone for a year and then meeting them, and it's almost like meeting people from the army again, where I haven't seen them for 20 years, but they're your best friend again, and you can just carry on where you left off last year. And what I also try and do, and this is something I would suggest to everybody who goes to a convention, is every year I try something different. I try a game that I haven't played before, because you never know. And that's like when I first played Vaesen. I first played it with Matt, and it was it looks all right. I'll give it a go because it's the one for this year, and now I love it. It's probably my favourite. I'll always look for one. So you always have to look for something new, which I guess when you've played conventions for years is always more difficult, because eventually you've played it all. But then if you can't find a different system, find a different DM, and that's something I'm going to try and have a go at this next year, is actually do a game as well. So look for someone new to run it, because that by default will be a different experience, because you running Cthulhu is different to Matt running Cthulhu, is different to when Paul runs Cthulhu. You know, it's different depending on who does it. And sometimes you'll find a GM who plays a certain system, and the two together, you always want. So
exactly.
Chris, no, not Chris. Is it Chris? Chris Everard, is that his name? I think.
Yep.
Yeah, he does D&D 3.5. I would try and get on one of his every year because he's the way he runs games. I just love going to. So it's kind of that mix of doing stuff you love, but also trying something new.
Absolutely.
I hope that helps.
And I'll tell you what, I was in Bayton last weekend. I don't know how far that is from you, but Bayton, Suffolk. I was down.
That's 2 villages over because I'm in Elmswell.
Right. Well, my sister's got cancer at the moment, so I'm coming home quite a bit just to see her and keep an eye on her.
Right.
So next time I'm over, maybe we can meet up and have a drink. It'd be good to see you.
Yeah, it'd be nice.
Yeah. Cuba, over to you.
Apologies for leaving that, just family on the phone and whatever.
No,
I don't know what you've discussed so far. Obviously, I got to your presentation.
Yeah.
But carrying on from what Richard was saying, definitely every time I go to a convention, I make it a mission to try at least another game, one I've never played before. And I also try and get a DM I've never played with before. Sometimes the two marry up, sometimes it's quite difficult. But you can only seem to expand not only your network, but the whole network of GMs. Like most of the GMs I know at conventions, Conception, IndieCon, I used to run Battle Masters 30 years ago, whatever. But they're a mine of knowledge. If you're struggling or you don't understand some of the rules or whatever, just 5 minutes over a beer can save you hours looking through rule books and other things. I find is some mechanics are really clunky. So I did quite a lot of work with Cthulhu and whatever. Absolutely loved the system, liked the setting, but then after a while, I knew all the rules inside out. Always hated the chase mechanics. One of my personal bugbears that was. But speaking to other DMs, excuse me, we come up with a completely new system. So instead of doing they start 2 ahead, you start 2 behind, work out, who's got a sprint on, who makes a strength check, and you kind of do a tortoise and hare, almost like Formula D kind of movement, where you move X spaces, they move X spaces. It can be over in a flash, or it can be really tedious and long. So the formula myself and a couple of other guys came up with is if you want the chase to last a certain amount of time, we just made it a series of checks. So we said, okay, you're in a foot race. There's 5 checks you've got to make. You run into a square, spot a guy, he starts running, what do you do? And then leave it to the players to come up with their own ideas, to be looking for answers. So players aren't really used to that, especially D&D players. Unfortunately, if you leave it open, they're not quite as sure what to do. But if you say, okay, well, describe to me what you're doing. If somebody says, oh, I'm keeping an eye on him, can I head him down the next pass? Yeah, brilliant. Right, what do you want to use for that? Do you want to use navigation? Do you want to use dodge to, navigation to work out a back street that he might not have thought about, dodge to weave in and out throughout the crowd, psychology, thinking, is this guy going to double back on us at some point? Just 5 simple tests that your character can do. And if they make 3 out of 5, they catch the guy. Obviously, if they lose more than 2, he escapes. But it gives everybody a chance. So my advice to DMs, especially at conventions, would be the following: would be 1, always use pre-gens. I don't like it, but just for the essence of speed and everything, unless it's something stupidly simple like Morkborg or something like that, you can roll d6s in under 5 minutes. If it's longer than that, don't bother. Also, if you've got a fairly rigid adventure, so you kind of have an idea of beginning, middle, and end, what sort of things I should be doing, then you need to make sure those skills are on those character sheets. So if you're doing that, the other thing I've always found is you've got to give people a chance to be in the spotlight. We all hate people talking over and telling us what our characters should be doing and how to play our character. Well, no, thank you. I'll play my character as I see it. But you've got to give these guys a moment shine in the spotlight. We take D&D, you're going to have a big brute orc for the fighter to fight. You've got to have a trap somewhere for the thief to have a go. You're going to have somewhere where you're aiding the poor, maybe with clerical spells. Another thing that's only going to be like a magical trap, but you've got to give each player a mini spotlight, no more than 2 or 3 minutes, but then people buy into it. They see that they're given that moment without interruption, and they can make it as cool or as not as they see fit. I always say rule of cool overrides most things, and always say to people, it sounds good, have you got the dice to back it up? So those are my sort of things. So give them pre-gens. If anyone's played with Mark, I forgot his name now, always does Shadowrun, Mark Perry. If you ever look at one of his tables, absolutely stunning. So the work you put into it, when you get to the table and you see a nice character sheet, color printed out. I mean, he laminates them, does background music, does whatever. It's a lot of work and you won't get much thanks for it. But the one thing you will find is players will instantly drop into the right frame of mind of that game. So if you want it nice, quiet, investigatory, whatever, your character sheets reflect that. The music's quite suspenseful, but down low. You talk quietly and you let players adjust to you rather than the other way around. So I'm not walking around the table, and shout at the top of my voice. I'll talk quietly so then the players naturally are drawn in. So they're buying into it all the time. You need buy-in from players to get a good game out of people, I think. But
thank you very
that's
much.
my 2 pennies.
I have to interrupt because my players have started to turn up for tonight's session. So as you can see, this is Lloyd. Lloyd, hello.
Hello, Lloyd.
He's just walked over in the darkness. So I'd like to move over. I'd like everyone to get a chance just to say something. Mike, what did you come up with for your list? Let's go quickly.
So for reasons why you should run a game at a convention, I agree with pretty much everything you said, but the things that you didn't mention that I would normally look for are the new perspectives you encounter. You're playing away from your usual group. Most of us have a regular group. It is great sometimes to shove similar situation in front of people you've never met or know much less well and see they have very different questions and very different approaches, and it makes you think differently about how you run stuff. And occasionally you get great moments and you go, oh, I could use that in my regular game. And also, I agree wholeheartedly what you're saying about you go to games as a player, you go to try out new systems. That's a gift you can give to people. You can take along a system you don't think a lot of people will run and go, have a go at this, see if you like it.
Absolutely. I'm always keen on doing that, playing games that people might love, they haven't played for a long time. Lloyd, would you have played Traveller if I hadn't run it for you?
No, I wouldn't have done.
No, it's not your kind of thing, but you've enjoyed it, haven't you? So,
And-
yeah. Mike, carry on, sorry.
That's okay. Last thing is a good reason for doing it, particularly at contingency, is it is ridiculously supportive. I can't think of anywhere I've been where people are just, sure, play your thing. That's cool. We'll run it. We'll come along. We'll have a good time with it. We'll engage with the game. I've been playing role-playing games since I was 10, but I'm relatively new to running stuff at conventions. Only contingency was pretty much in 2020 was pretty much my first ever convention. And I was very nervous about playing with people I didn't know. And can you think of anywhere that is more welcoming than there?
It gives you so much more confidence as well as you do it. So definitely helps there as well.
Well,
my advice to people who are thinking about it is do it. It'll be a load easier than you think it is.
I think most role-playing game conventions are really friendly. I mean, Grand Tribunal, there's only 30 or 40 people there. It's really friendly. Continuum, very supportive. But Contingency has a very special place in our hearts, and it is a great convention. Lee, I'm going to ask you, because you're there. Lee, would you like to just quickly jump in with some things that you would like to say that you wanted to say, but which I didn't say during the night?
Well, I generally in agreement with what everyone else has been saying about supportiveness, the way the games are run, what to do, tips and tricks. But I'm really here today to gather up as much information as I can, because after all these years, I've still never run a proper game at a convention. So I am changing that. I'm changing that in January. It is going to be at Contingency. I think I was talking to Goober about this in the bar last year, and possibly when Massey was there as well. We were all sat around just having a natter right at the end. So that I'm still going to do it. I don't know what it will be, but I know that Contingency is the place for me to try it.
But
hopefully there won't be any plastic pineapples. Hey, Richard.
Lee Williams is going to run a game at Contingency. We'll sign up for that, won't we?
Okay.
Yeah, you'll get us and Sue Savage, definitely, unless you're careful. You'll have to run and hide, otherwise we'll sign up for your game.
So, that's okay. I'll see if I can be as spooky as Sue is.
See if you can run. I think you should run a game about the implosion of a psychical research group and their persecution of their former chair.
I think your best idea is
quite a random topic there.
I wonder how.
I don't know where you get the inspiration from, CJ.
Yeah. No, jokes aside, I really look forward to seeing you play. Lloyd, I forced him into running games one year because we didn't have enough referees at Grand Tribunal. So I wrote some adventures and he ran them, and he's run his own since then, haven't you?
I have. Yeah.
And you enjoy running for people, don't you?
Sometimes, depending on the game.
Yeah, but I mean, you enjoy running Ars Magica. I think we've only ever had one person who's complained that they were put off. They were one of the authors, and one of the players gave them detailed feedback immediately after the game on what they thought was wrong with their game. And that's happened to me at a freeform convention. It wasn't a role-playing game convention. But I will promise you this. If you've just finished playing one of my games and you want to say that was great, I enjoyed it, fantastic, sit around and talk about it. But leave the criticism for 24 hours. Leave it till at least breakfast the next day when I'm not exhausted, fraggled, and have just finished it. Unless it's something like, you were aware of the fact that you used outdated, outmoded, sexist, vile language or something like that. In which case, that's fine. Nobody's ever said that to me, but if it was. But, at the end of the day, you really do need to actually hold off criticising people's games publicly for the first hour or two after they're finished running them, because it's really disheartening.
And be careful if you ask for it.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to know about what you did well or what you did badly, and I've played in a couple of shocking games in my life, but normally not at conventions. But yeah, it can happen. But just leave it till, if you have to go, make an excuse and leave by all means. But don't criticize referees to their face immediately the game ends. It's so demoralizing. John, you haven't had a chance to talk. Please, John, over to you. Ask you to unmute. There you go.
Cheers. I must admit, I feel like a bit of an interloper. I've just got back into role-playing games after many years, since the 70s, 80s. Found a load of stuff in the loft last year. found a local D&D group and joined them. Very rapidly fell out of love with 5th edition D&D, and then I started to expand all the stuff I found in my loft. So like RuneQuest 2nd and 3rd edition, I had GURPS, all kinds of stuff. And a friend of mine who I knew from that time ago said he goes to contingency. So this is all kind of like new to me. So I'm hoping to get there in January. I'd love to run a couple of games of Earthdawn or Mithras, which have become my favorite systems since getting back into it. So all of the stuff I had 35, 40 years ago, I've kind of like read through and updated, and then I've kind of like thought, those rules worked bad, those are good, and kind of like out of those two, I've come through that those two systems right now are like they really sync with how I see game systems being worked and run. So those are the two I like to run. I've just got to work through the hoops of understanding how to get there in terms of.
That's always the toughest bit.
Yeah, well, I've got the time from work slotted in my diary. I've got to clear my misses, but just the practicalities of how you get registered on-site, accommodation and stuff like that. That's the practicality issues of it. For me, what I'm looking forward to is, because I've just got back into it recently, and the group the physical role-playing group I've joined locally, everybody's coming in from D&D. That's all they want to play. That's all they want to run. So for me, it's an opportunity to run systems I think are better role-playing systems. And for me, those two systems, Earthdawn and Mithras, have come through as like the best game mechanics, the best world systems, and trying to be able to do two things. One is get the rule system over in a very short space of time, but also flavor of the world system as well. Kind of like, for me, it's a great challenge to try and hone it into. Run a great game for 4 hours, get people really well going, wow, this, don't worry about the system, I'll explain to you as you go through it. This is what you do. Hopefully they'll have a great time about it, but get a flavor of the world that sits behind the game system and the way the designers have kind of like thought about it. Because I must admit, I don't like the way they've taken RuneQuest in the last 40 years from when I last played it in the 80s. It was much freer, much looser, and now it's just like, I bought the new RuneQuest set, and I was, afterwards I'm thinking, shit, that was £100 worth of money I probably could have better spent somewhere else with RuneQuest Glorantha and stuff. So I think things have moved on, and so I would like to try and expose people to different kinds of systems that are still, for me, crunchy, but not, kind of like where things have gone.
Nice.
I haven't played Earthdawn since '88, I don't think. So it's been 26 years since I last played that system. So it'd certainly be interesting to go back and play that again. I enjoyed it at the time, definitely. And it's not that I don't like Earthdawn. It's just there's an awful lot of RPGs that I've played since. So, yeah. So
I'm different because I've done nothing for 35 years, since like 91. Maybe like everything got packed up and life took over, relationships and house moves and stuff, and it's sat there in the loft in cardboard boxes. And all of a sudden, the last 2 years, last year, I've been just unearthing handwritten notes, rule books and stuff, and then buying stuff as well. So it's kind of like come back to it with a fresh view from all those years ago.
Come here, Loki. So I'm talking to my cat, who's just off his camera. Ed, are you there? Mr. Ed Woods, can you hear us?
He is muted.
Ed is muted. He might not be able to get online easily. Phil, over to you. What do you have to say about running games at conventions?
Well, there's one thing I have to complain about.
What's that?
My first convention, you made me run a game and you didn't write it for me.
Yeah, no, that was mean of me, wasn't it? And I'm afraid
very mean of you.
The door constitutes my players turning up, so you're now going to have something new to complain about. Phil, I'm going to hand over to you, and I'm going to have to disappear.
That's all right. Hand over to someone else. I need to go and lie down for a bit. I'm a bit exhausted.
Okay, well, in that case, I will wish everyone a very happy evening. Thank you very, very much. And yeah, John, if we can all meet up somewhere on a forum and talk about it, or if we can all post in the contingency group and say we turned up and we spoke, I hope it wasn't too boring. I try to keep it as light-hearted and fast and moving as I can, but I know I do drone on. So my apologies. I hope you found my ramblings at least mildly useful. Richard, I'll see you before Christmas probably, because I'm going to be down in your part of the world.
Yep.
Everybody else, I'm in Cheltenham. If any of you want to come down and play games, give me a shout. And if any of you are struggling to get to contingency and need a hand getting there, let me know, because there are people who will help you with lifts, and lift sharing and caravan sharing is very much part of that community, isn't it?
And working out the logistics and all the rest. I'm sure we can help if anything helps, John.
And also, I strongly advise you that the best way to be able to go to role-playing conventions is to follow my career plan and to apply to be Father Christmas, because that way you've got 364 days free when you are not expected. Or alternatively, my secondary plan, which is to find an attractive young lady who works in the RPG industry, who's willing to work full-time to support you. So, on that note, I wish you a very happy night. Good night, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Night, folks.
Cheers.